That's a damn chest!
Anonymous evangelists. To transition from the Hebrew
China
of the Torah to the Greek New Testament is to move from the scribe of the king to the anonymous evangelist. The global, traditional assumption that the four Gospels Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were authored by the specific apostles whose names they now bear as a secondary, second-century tradition, not a historical fact. When we apply the surgical tools of lower criticism and philological analysis, the eyewitness myth begins to dissolve, revealing a far more complex reality of oral tradition, community memory, and sophisticated Greek redaction. The truth that shatters is that the Gospels are anonymous manuscripts written by highly educated, Greek-speaking Christians 40 to 70 years after the death of Jesus' authors who were not walking the dusty roads of Galilee with the Messiah, but were instead navigating the theological and political crises of a growing movement in the Greco-Roman world. The primary forensic evidence for this anonymity lies in the linguistic profile of the text. The traditional authors Matthew the tax collector and John the fisherman were Aramaic-speaking Jews from Galilee.
You suck my dick, bitch. Suck my motherfucker.
A region where literacy was minimal and a mastery of high register. Rhetorical Greek was virtually non-existent for the lower classes.
Suck my slut!
The Gospels are written in polished, literary coined Greek that utilizes sophisticated structures, chiasmus, and complex vocabulary. The forensics inclusion is inescapable. The real authors were not the unlettered and ordinary men described in the book of Acts, but were instead elite, urban scribes
Chinese
in Hellenistic schools of rhetoric. They were translating oral Aramaic memories into a literary Greek medium, a process that apparently involves theological transfiguration. The Gospels are not journal entries, they are theological manifestos. The core of the forensic puzzle is the synoptic problem. When the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are placed side by side, the synopsis, the degree of verbatim Greek overlap is staggering. These authors are not merely describing the same events, they are copying from one another, often word for
Heads are kinda rolled,
including identical grammatical quirks. The consensus of modern scholarship is Mark in priority. Mark was the first Gospel written c. 70 CE, around the time of the Roman destruction of the Temple, and had served as the skeletal foundation for Matthew and Luke.
Time to knock the rock and roll!
Source Q, from the German quell, meaning source.
Time to knock the rock
Matthew
and
and Luke
roll!
share nearly 235 verses of Jesus' sayings that are entirely absent from Mark. This points to the existence of a lost early collection of sayings of Jesus, a sayings gospel that circulated in the early church before being absorbed into the larger narratives. The human hand is visible in the very act of this compilation. The evangelists were curators of tradition, not original observers. The most profound evidence of the scribe's pen is found in redaction criticism. The analysis of how Matthew and Luke edited Mark to fit their specific theological agendas. When Mark portrays a Jesus who is humanly limited, who could not perform miracles in his hometown, or who experiences raw anger, Matthew and Luke surgically alter the Greek to make Jesus appear more divine, more omnipotent, and more in control. For example, Matthew is obsessed with fulfillment citations, constantly interrupting the narrative to claim that an event happened to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets. This is the scribe as apologist. Matthew is retrofitting the life of Jesus into a Jewish framework to prove his legitimacy to a skeptical audience. Luke, conversely, smooths out Mark's rough Greek and emphasizes the universal, Greco-Roman appeal of the message.
Stop that damn game, you slant-eyed
They are the
slut!
intentional, creative choices of anonymous
From
authors
China!
taking the image of Jesus to ensure the survival of their specific communities. The Johannine departure represents a total linguistic and theological break from the synoptics. The Gospel of John is not
street
utilize
whore.
mark and structure, nor
Street
does it
whore.
contain the Q source. The Jesus of John does not speak in short, pithy parables about the kingdom of God. Instead, he delivers long, esoteric discourses about his own pre-existence and divinity, utilizing the highly philosophical language of the Logos, the Word. Philological analysis suggests that the Johannine community developed their own distinct, isolated tradition over several decades, culminating in a text that is more about high Christology than historical record. The truth of John is found not in the facts of the road, but in the depths of the Mediterranean philosophical mind. The author of John was a philosopher scribe who saw the life of Jesus as a cosmic event that transcended the limits of Galilean history. The brutal truth of Part 2 is that the names Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were attached to these anonymous documents by the early church fathers, such as Irenaeus, in the late 2nd century. This was a strategic move to grant the text's apostolic authority in the fierce battles against Gnosticism and other competing Christianities. By claiming the Gospels were written by the apostles themselves, the Church locked the narrative, providing an orthodox seal that effectively silenced other, more radical versions of the Jesus story. The real authors were nameless, brilliant architects of memory, who recognized that for a faith to endure, it must be pinned down into a stable, written form. In conclusion, the Gospels are the product of community memory and redaction. For 40 years, the stories of Jesus were dynamic, oral performances, told and retold in the Aramaic-speaking villages of Judea. When they were finally written down in Greek, they were transformed. The synoptic ghost is the evidence of this transformation, the trace of the human hand that selected which stories to keep, which words to change, and which theological lenses to apply. To read the Gospels is not to hear the voice of Jesus directly, but to hear the voice of the first century attempting to make sense of him. The anonymity of the evangelists is their greatest gift. They surrendered their identities so that their specific visions of the Christ could become universal. The New Testament is not a diary. It is the final edit of a revolution. The Uthmanic seal, the forensic history of the Quranic text. To subject the Quran to a forensic historical analysis is to investigate the transition from a dynamic, oral performance to a standardized, written codex.
To a bastardized
In Islamic theology, the Quran is the uncreated, eternal Word of God, preserved with absolute fidelity from the moment of Gabriel's presentation to the modern printed page. However, the forensic reality reveals a far more complex human layer in the preservation and standardization of the text. The Uthmanic seal, the act of the third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan, in creating a singular authorized version of the Quran was not merely an act of piety. It was a sophisticated political and linguistic closure designed to unify a rapidly expanding empire that was beginning to fracture over the very sounds of the divine. To understand who wrote the Quran is to understand the process of stabilized orality, where the breath of the prophet was captured and locked into a human-engineered script. The linguistic heart of the Quran is found in the Meccan and Medinan divide. Forensic analysis of the 114 surahs reveals two entirely different acoustic and structural worlds. The earlier Meccan surahs are characterized by short, visceral, and highly rhythmic verses known as Saj-rhymed prose. These are the utterances of a visionary prophet saturated with apocalyptic imagery, cosmic oaths, and a sense of urgent, impending judgment. In contrast, the later Medinan surahs are long, legalistic, and administrative, reflecting the language of a statesman and legislator. While tradition views this as a chronological progression of revelation, a forensic philologist sees the evolution of a movement. The Quran was not a pre-packaged book. It was a cumulative oral performance that was collected, arranged, and edited by human hands over several decades. The transition from the poetic to the legal is the forensic record of a religion becoming a state. The primary forensic smoking gun in the history of the Quran is the Sana'a palimpsest, discovered in 1,972 inches Yemen. This manuscript is a palimpsest, a parchment where the original text was washed off to make room for a newer version. Utilizing multispectral imaging, researchers have revealed a lower text that dates to the 1st century of Islam. This lower text contains significant variations from the standard Uthmanic Quran used today, including different word orders, different spellings, and variations in verse structure. This discovery is a truth that shatters the myth of an immediate, perfect textual vacuum. It proves that before the Uthmanic seal, there was a period of textual fluidity. There were competing codices, most notably those of the Prophet's companions Ibn Masud and Ubayy ibn Ka'b, which contained different arrangements and even different numbers of surahs. The Quran we have today is the result of a deliberate, human-led selection and standardization process that chose one version and suppressed the others. The Uthmanic standardization, c. 650 CE, was a forensic act of sovereignty. As the Islamic Empire swallowed the Persian and Byzantine territories, the diverse dialects of the Arab tribes began to produce linguistic friction in the recitation of the Quran. To prevent a great divorce, similar to the one that split the Christian and Jewish worlds, Uthman ordered a committee of scribes, led by Zayd ibn Thabit, to compile a master codex in the dialect of the Quraysh. This was the closure of the canon. Uthman's most controversial and effective act was to order the destruction by fire of all other competing versions of the Quran.
Now, I'm not talking Joseph Stalin either. I'm talking about Stalin!
A single imperial standard. The real authors of the Quran's final form were thus the scribes and the caliph who decided which reading was authorized and which was heresy. The human hand is perhaps most visible in the evolution of the Arabic script. The earliest Quranic manuscripts, such as the Hijazi and Kufic scripts, were written in a skeleton known as the razm. Crucially, this early script lacked vowels and diacritical marks that distinguish between different consonants, such as B, D, and N. This meant that a single written word could be read in multiple ways, leading to entirely different meanings. The 7 aruf and 10 qira'at, recitations, are the traditional Islamic way of acknowledging this ambiguity, but linguistically, they represent the human stabilization of the text. It was not until several centuries later that scholars like Ibn Mujahid vocalized the text with permanent dots and vowels. This process was an act of interpretation, where human scholars effectively chose the final meaning of the divine word. The Quran we read today is not just the word of God, it is the grammatical decision of 10th century philologists. The brutal truth of Part 3 is that the Quran is a masterpiece of archival engineering. The finger of God provided the revelation, but the pen of the scribe and the decree of the caliph provided the book. The Uthmanic seal turned a living, breathing oral tradition into a stable, legal document that could govern an empire. Forensic history does not diminish the spiritual power of the Quran, but it reveals the grit, the politics, and the human dedication required to preserve it. The Quran is the result of a rigorous man-made shield placed around a divine performance. To read it is to encounter the final edit of a revolution, a text that was forged in the fire of standardization to ensure that the oneness of God is reflected in the oneness of the book. The scribes and the silence, the synthesis of the human and the divine. To arrive at the conclusion of this forensic autopsy is to witness the great convergence of the 3 Abrahamic traditions. We have moved from the Mosaic myth of the Torah to the synoptic ghost of the Gospels, and finally to the Uthmanic seal of the Quran. The truth that might shatter your faith is not the discovery of a void, but the discovery of a human architecture supporting the divine word. The secret of the holy books is that they are not celestial objects that fell from the sky in a state of static perfection. They are collaborative, multi-generational masterpieces of scribal intervention. The scribes and the silence refers to the thousands of anonymous hands that shaped, edited, and standardized these sixth men who surrendered their individual identities so that the voice of God could achieve a singular, authoritative resonance. This is the synthesis of the human and the divine. A process where the finger of God utilized the pen of the scribe to navigate the specific traumas of human history. The process of this synthesis is the concept of theological redaction. In every tradition we have analyzed, the final version of the book was triggered by a crisis of identity. For the Jews, it was the Babylonian exile. For the Christians, it was the destruction of the Second Temple and the delay of the Parousia. For the Muslims, it was the expansion of the empire and the threat of linguistic fracture. In each case, a group of anonymous actors of the documentary hypothesis, the Q-source collectors, and the Uthmanic committee stepped into the silence. These were not mere copyists.
Come on, dickhole, move, you dickhole.
They took the fluid, often contradictory oral memories of their communities and locked them into a stable written form. Linguistically, this process involves smoothing out the difficulties, removing the anthropomorphic rough edges of the J-source, harmonizing the conflicting sayings of Jesus, or standardizing the Arabic razm. The human hand was the filter that allowed the divine message to become a national constitution. A critical component of this synthesis is the phenomenon of pseudepigrapha and anonymous authority. Why did the authors of the Gospels not sign their names? Why did the editors of the Torah attribute their work to a long-dead Moses? In the ancient world, authorial identity was secondary to canonical legitimacy. By remaining silent and writing under the mask of a great prophet or an apostle, the scribes granted their texts an inherited gravity that was beyond challenge. This was a sophisticated linguistic strategy. The silence of the real author allowed the voice of the character to speak with the authority of God.
Come on,
the
you
forensic death
that
of the individual author was the birth of the holy book. This anonymity is the ultimate act of religious devotion. The scribe becomes a transparent...
Don't even think about it!
The community's focus remains on the content of the revelation rather than the identity of the recorder. Furthermore, the synthesis reveals that the holy books are actually stabilized orality.
Come on!
There is a common misconception that writing is the primary act of revelation. However, in all 3 faiths, the revelation was originally an acoustic, performative event, the Song of Moses, the parables of Jesus, and the recitation of Muhammad. The transition to text was a freezing of the breath. Forensic analysis shows that
would
the
you
grammar
please
and
move your
structure of the Holy
whoremonger?
Books still carry the rhythmic DNA of
You're
oral
sick and tired of
performance.
this shit.
The mnemonic devices, the repetitions, and the chiasmus are the linguistic footprints of a time when the word lived in the ear and the heart
Suck my
the
slut!
page. The synthesis occurred when the scribes developed a scribal orthography to capture these sounds, a process that involved making difficult choices about vowels, diacritics, and word order. To read a holy
Suck
book
my
is to read a
slut.
recording of a divine performance, edited by human sound engineers.
Move!
The brutal truth of this part 4 is that there is no such thing as a clean or unmediated text. Every sacred page is stained with the ink of human politics, local dialects,
Come on, you
and theological
slut.
bias. The human hand is not a contamination. It is the incarnation of the Word into the world. The Bible
Come
and the
on,
Quran are
slant-eyed
mosaics, where
slut.
the divine light is refracted through the human prism
You
of the 7th century
slant-eyed
BCE
slut.
or the 1st and 7th century CE. When we recognize the committee of ghosts
Slut.
behind the Torah or the anonymous evangelists behind the Gospels, we see a faith that is grounded in the gritty
this
reality of
starting to
human
fucking
struggle.
piss me off.
The truth that shatters only shatters a fragile, literalist idol. It replaces it with a robust, historical monument to the human search for the infinite. In conclusion, the who really wrote the holy books inquiry leads us to
What
a
the
profound
goddamn
paradox. The books are holy precisely because they were written by us. They are the collective diaries of a
You suck
species
my
attempting to
motherfucking
communicate
dick,
with its
bitch.
creator. The scribes utilized every tool at
Suck
their
my
disposal:
fucking
rhetoric,
dick.
pseudepigrapha, redaction, and canonization to ensure that the
Stupid!
survived the passage of time.
Yep, I
The
was stupid as
synthesis of the
shit.
human and the divine is found in the persistence of the word. The fact that these books, constructed by many hands and edited
I just dicked
so
up a
speak with a
poem!
voice that commands the attention of billions, is the ultimate miracle. The real author is the spirit of a community
God damn
in
it,
dialogue with
fuck
the
up.
silence of God.
That
And the
fucking
Holy Book
pisses
is the
me off.
ink-stained bridge they built to cross the
You see,
gap.
I fell
The
for
truth
that like
does
a
not
second
shatter
bitch
faith.
of shit.
It
Each
invites
one
it
a
into
ton
a
of
deeper,
shit.
more mature
Now
understanding
I'm
of the
eating
divine
shit.
collaboration that is the human story.
God, fuck it. You suck my motherfucking dick, bitch. You suck my dick, bitch. Bitch, you suck my motherfucking dick. You suck my dick. You suck my dick, but you suck my dick. You suck my motherfucking dick. You suck my dick.
I can feel it. I've got that
Bitch, you
look in
suck
my
my
eye
dick,
when it's
bitch.
time for a new Mind Shift series. And I don't have a
Suck
good name
my
for this
dick.
one
You
yet. I'm
suck
thinking
my
either
dick.
sacred versus
You suck
secular,
my motherfucking
something like
dick.
that. But there are
I
these
fuck
words
his
that are so often
Oh!
overtaken or straight up stolen by religion that people outside of religion seem to avoid, or we get
Take a ride on the
distanced
stupid
from in some
machine.
way. I'm thinking
Stupid,
words
stupid,
like
stupid, stupid,
forgiveness,
stupid,
which is one that came up
stupid,
on a
stupid.
previous episode, but
Oh!
purpose, morality, truth, suffering, redemption, even faith, obedience, community,
Suck my
and freedom, and so many more. And what I want to do in this
Suck
series
my
is take
motherfucking
just one
dick,
word.
bitch.
We'll go ahead and start with forgiveness
Suck my
and explore it both biblically and then also secularly.
Bitch, you
Because
suck
to me,
my
all of these
God
words, all
damn
of
it.
these feelings, all of these concepts
God
are
fucking
human
damn it.
concepts first, and then they break
Holy
down into
Ghost.
categories like religious. So in an effort
Holy
to
Ghost.
take these words back and separate them from their religious
Holy
claims,
Ghost.
I thought this series would be interesting. Many people were taught and only taught forgiveness as a Christian virtue, a divine command, almost a sacrament of the heart. So when they leave
Suck my
Christianity,
motherfucking
sometimes they
dick,
can
bitch.
reject that entirely. Sometimes they see the
Suck
errors
my
truly in the
motherfucking
biblical worldview version of this concept, forgiveness. And so it becomes almost a negative to them.
Suck
They don't
my
owe
motherfucking
forgiveness to
dick.
anybody. That was a command Jesus gave them. That's not true of the world. Or sometimes they can even feel guilty that they can't approach
suck
it in
my
the same way
motherfucking
they
dick.
used to.
You
And I'm
suck
here
my
to
dick.
squash all of that. Christianity
Suck my
did not
motherfucking dick.
invent
You suck
forgiveness.
my-
We
You
as
suck
humans
my
have always
dick.
needed ways to deal with betrayal,
suck my
resentment,
dick,
repair,
bitch.
anger, and social
You suck
cohesion
my
long
dick, bitch.
before
You
Christianity
suck my
came on the
dick,
scene.
bitch.
There are some
You
interesting
suck my
Christian ideas
dick,
about forgiveness,
bitch.
and there are
You
some
suck my
horrific
dick, bitch.
Christian ideas about forgiveness.
Bitch,
So
you
I'm
suck
excited to
my
look at forgiveness from a psychological or human process, rather than the supernatural obligation that so many of us know as. Let me read you just a couple verses. We could go deeper, but I don't want this to be a Bible study on forgiveness. I want to talk about the concept at large, but here's a couple I pulled. Matthew 6:14-15. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. So here we have forgiveness being conditional, which already taints it. Forgiveness, if such a thing does exist in any form, needs to be something completely voluntary from the individual for it to have meaning, just like love. When these things are conditional, forgive to be forgiven, love to be loved, or love to be saved from the horrible thing your God will do to you if you do not, it loses any meaning that it had. This is the first reason that the biblical version of forgiveness has to be wrong. Additionally, in Mark 11:25, whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father in heaven may also forgive your trespasses. So again, just backing this up. New Testament forgiveness has to do with your standing before God. So much for the healing aspect that we assume psychologically get when we choose to forgive others. It boils down biblically to spiritual compliance. Let me read you a couple more that show it in a different light. Matthew 18:21-22. And said to him, if my brother or sister sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times. And then in Colossians 3:13 and Ephesians 4:32, we see similar commands to forgive because God forgave you. First of all, this God could do with a bit of taking his own advice. The very first thing biblically we get to see does God have a chance to forgive. He doesn't. He lays upon all people, even the ones not born yet, generations that would happen thousands of years later in the biblical worldview, the opposite of forgiveness, curse. And the craziest curses, the most harmful curses of all, the curses of death and toil and submission and pain, and also original sin. Someone put in my comments the other day, the best tweak to a verse would be John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he forgave them. Just straight up. Not conditional in you believing or doing the right thing. Just a side note of the hypocrisy of this God, who should be, if he's perfect, our perfect example of what forgiveness looks like, and yet is asking more of us mere mortals to always forgive, is what this verse means. And that is where a lot of the pushback came from when I talked about a secular version of forgiveness in a past video, and I agree. I do not think everyone should have to forgive everyone who has ever wronged them. I talked about the power of forgiveness secularly, to let go of resentment as a gift that you give yourself, not something you're bestowing to another person. I am with you. This is unhealthy. You do not owe forgiveness. But that's what the Bible would have you believe. And again, it's tied into some Christian value. Jesus said to forgive, so if you are not forgiving, you are bad. What a horrendous concept. We also see the abuse of this, of course. You've probably seen the same videos I have. Young girls dragged up in front of a congregation and told to forgive their pastor that sexually assaulted them. That is insanity. Moralizing forgiveness as a duty of being a believer robs it of all possible meaning and benefit. And then even for those who are smart enough to see the difference still within the faith, what a mess for them internally. What if they've forgiven because that's what's expected of them, but they still feel angry? Did they really forgive? Is God pleased with them? Is God going to be able to forgive them? What if they just can't forgive? Something horrendous has been done to them. Now they're the one carrying around sin, while this person who did the actual offense is scot-free because they said
he sees a dick in your future. He sees a dick.
Forgiveness is not a switch.
He sees a dick in your future. He sees a dick. He sees a dick in your future. He sees a dick.
From emotional
he sees a dick in your future. He sees a dick.
He sees a dick in your future. He sees a dick. Many emotions, by the way.
He sees a dick in your future. He sees a dick.
In a lot of Christian
sees a dick in your
situation.
future.
It
He
looks a
sees
lot
a
less like
dick.
a hurt posture and more like
He
a
sees a
forgiveness
dick in
as
your
in
future.
stop
He
worrying and
sees a
acting up.
dick.
It's time to restore the relationship.
He sees a
You need
dick
to
in your
trust
future.
them again.
He
You need
sees
to
a
move
dick.
on from your hurt.
I
Don't make
see a
this
dick
awkward.
in your future.
Gosh,
I
it's
see
so
a dick.
gross I could barf. But
I
again,
see a dick in your
forgiveness
future.
and
I see a
reconciliation
dick.
are two distinct
I see a
happenings.
dick in your
Reconciliation
future.
is the
I
other
see a
side of the
dick.
coin, and that should not be mandatory
And-
in any way. Not that forgiveness should, by the way, either. But if we're separating the two, oh my
And it's gonna go straight up your butt and until it comes out of your fucking mouth. Puke and cum. My dick and your mouth are both gonna be puke and cum at the same time, because my long dick is gonna be fucking you in the ass, and you're gonna be sucking the same goddamn dick at the same goddamn time. You son of a goddamn goddamn bitch.
Oh my gosh, this is reserved for if and when, if it's healthy and if it serves you, and if the other person is, you know, how we talk about this, actually sorry, has given you any reason to believe that things could be different, or that they even understand your pain, or what they did was wrong. How could one ever truly forgive or reconcile with another party that isn't at that place? But let's just talk about forgiveness at large. I'm going to read you a definition from the American Psychological Association on forgiveness. Forgiveness is a human option for reducing resentment and revenge after a real wrong, without denying the wrong, erasing accountability, or requiring renewed closeness.
This is fucking pissing me
I
off.
love this. I could have sat down for 5 years and not come up with a better definition.
this
This
is
lets
boring
us
shit.
make several important distinctions. Here's what forgiveness is not. It's not excuse.
You suck my dick, bitch.
Pay attention to the security camera footage from Miami International Airport. You're looking at TSA agents surrounding an open suitcase on the airport floor, and inside that suitcase is a child. A 12-year-old boy wrapped in duct tape and plastic, surrounded by melting ice packs, barely breathing. See the paramedics rushing in from the right side of the frame? Notice how one of the agents has his hand covering his mouth in shock? This isn't a trafficking case or a kidnapping by a stranger. The woman who checked this bag. This isn't a trafficking case or a kidnapping by a stranger. The woman who checked this bag, the woman who drugged this child, sealed him in luggage, and tried to smuggle him onto an international flight, is his mother. In the next 2 hours, you're going to hear how a mother's twisted love for a criminal led her to nearly kill her own son, how a routine X-ray scan saved a child's life, and how one boy's testimony would bring down a murderer who thought he'd gotten away with the perfect crime.
God damn it.
You know that moment when you're going through airport security and you see TSA agents pull someone aside for a random bag check? Most of the time it's nothing. Forgotten water bottle, too much shampoo, maybe some nail clippers that are technically too long. You watch them open the bag, everyone's a little embarrassed, and life goes on. But on August 14, 2003, at Miami International Airport, a routine bag check revealed something so horrifying that seasoned TSA agents, people who'd seen weapons, drugs, and every kind of contraband imaginable, would need counseling after their shift ended. Let me tell you about Nathan Delgado. He was 12 years old in the summer of 2003, a quiet kid who loved video games and basketball, who was starting 7th grade in a few weeks. He lived with his mother, 12 years old in the summer.
Tough TSA agents needed counseling. That makes me feel so good about
Airport.
myself.
A routine bag check revealed something so horrifying that seasoned TSA agents, people who'd seen weapons, drugs, and every kind of contraband imaginable, would need counseling after their shift ended. Let me tell you about Nathan Delgado. He was 12 years old in the summer of 2003, a quiet kid who loved video games and basketball, who was starting 7th grade in a few weeks. He lived with his mother, Patricia, in a small apartment in Coral Gables, Florida. His parents had divorced when he was 6, and his father had moved to California for work. Nathan saw him maybe twice a year, so it was just Nathan and Patricia, and for the most part, that had been okay. Patricia Delgado was 42 years old, worked as a medical billing specialist at a hospital in Miami, and by all accounts was a devoted mother. She volunteered at Nathan's school, never missed his basketball games, made sure he did his homework. Neighbors described her as friendly, responsible, maybe a little overprotective of Nathan, but that seemed normal for a single mother. But here's what the neighbors didn't know. Patricia had been dating Marcus Bennett for 18 months, and Marcus Bennett was a very dangerous man. Marcus was charming, successful, at least on the surface. He ran a luxury car import business, drove a Mercedes, wore expensive suits, took Patricia to nice restaurants. He seemed like exactly the kind of stable, successful man a single mother would want in her life. Patricia introduced him to Nathan after they'd been dating for 6 months, and at first, everything seemed fine. Marcus was friendly to Nathan, bought him gifts, took them both out on weekends. What Patricia didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Marcus's import business was largely a front for money laundering, and his business partner, a man named Richard Cole, had recently figured that out. February 8th, 2003. That's the date everything changed for Nathan Delgado, though he wouldn't fully understand it for months. It was a Saturday evening. Patricia had asked Nathan if he wanted to go to Marcus's warehouse with her. Marcus had texted saying he needed to show her something about a surprise he was planning. Nathan had been bored at home, so he'd agreed to come along. They arrived at the warehouse around 7 p.m., just as the sun was setting. The warehouse was in an industrial area near the airport, the kind of place that's busy during the day but deserted at night. Patricia parked near the main entrance and they walked inside. The space was huge. Rows of expensive cars in various stages of inspection and preparation, tools and equipment everywhere, offices in the back corner. "Marcus!" Patricia called out. Her voice echoed in the vast space. "Back here!" Marcus's voice came from one of the offices. They walked toward the back, Nathan trailing behind his mother, looking at the cars with mild interest. A Lamborghini, a Ferrari, a Bentley. These weren't the kind of cars you saw in regular dealerships. As they got closer to the office, they could hear voices. Marcus wasn't alone. He was arguing with someone, and the argument was getting heated. "You can't do this, Marcus! I won't let you!"
Dick sucker.
The other voice was angry, desperate. "You don't have a choice, Richard. You should have kept your mouth shut." Patricia stopped walking. Nathan Stupid! She put her hand on his shoulder, holding him back. "Maybe we should come back later," she whispered. But before they could turn around, there was a sound. A loud crack that echoed through the warehouse. Then another, then silence. Nathan didn't fully understand what he heard. It sounded like something breaking, or maybe firecrackers. But his mother knew. She grabbed Nathan's arm so hard it hurt and pulled him behind a nearby car, pressing her finger to her lips. They crouched there in the shadows, hardly breathing. Footsteps. Marcus emerged from the office, and even from a distance, Nathan could see that something was wrong. Marcus's shirt had dark spots on it. His hands were shaking. He was holding something, a gun, and he was looking around the warehouse like he was checking to make sure he was alone. Patricia covered Nathan's mouth with her hand. They stayed frozen behind that car for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Finally, Marcus went back into the office. They heard sounds of movement, dragging, something heavy being moved.
Bitch, you suck my dick.
Patricia made a decision.
Bitch, you
Still
suck
holding Nathan's arm, she led him as quietly as possible toward the exit. They moved slowly, carefully, trying not to make any sound.
Bitch, you suck.
Nathan's heart was pounding so hard, he thought Marcus might hear it. They made it to the door, made it to the car. Patricia's hands were shaking so badly, she could barely get the key in the ignition. Once they were on the road, she drove in complete silence for 10 minutes before pulling into a grocery store parking lot. She turned to Nathan, and her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Nathan, listen to me very carefully. What we just heard, I think Marcus hurt someone. I think he hurt his business partner, Richard. Do you understand?" Nathan nodded slowly.
This is boring as shit.
February 23rd, 303 AD. Roman soldiers surround the largest Christian church in the empire.
Damn it.
The doors are broken down, the scriptures burned in the street, the walls torn down stone by stone.
God,
It was the beginning of the most systematic, most brutal, and most organized persecution Christians had ever faced. 10 years of state terror from Egypt to Britain.
God damn it.
And behind it all,
God
a
damn it,
single
God
man.
damn it, God damn it, God damn
The
it.
emperor who
God damn it.
saved Rome from collapse and declared war on God. This is the story of Diocletian.
Suck my dick, bitch. You
To
suck.
understand what Diocletian did to the Christians, you first need to understand the world he inherited. And that world was on fire. The 3rd century AD was, without exaggeration, the most chaotic period in Roman history. Historians call it the crisis of the 3rd century,
You suck.
but crisis is too mild a word to describe what happened. Between the years 235 and 284, the Roman Empire had at least 26 officially recognized emperors. If we count usurpers and regional pretenders, the number exceeds 50. Most died by assassination. Some lasted only weeks. One was captured alive by the enemy, the greatest humiliation a Roman emperor could suffer. That emperor was Valerian. In 206, the number exceeds 50. Most died by assassination. Some lasted only weeks.
Move, you whore.
One was captured alive by the enemy, the greatest humiliation a Roman emperor could suffer. That emperor was Valerian. In 260 AD, he was defeated and captured by the Persian Shah Shapur I at the Battle of Edessa. He did not die in combat. He did not escape. He was taken prisoner, carried off to Persia, and there spent the rest of his days as a human trophy of Sassanid power. According to some sources, the Shah used the bent body of the Roman emperor as a mounting step for his horse. When Valerian finally died in captivity, his skin was reportedly flayed, dyed red, and hung in a Persian temple as an eternal warning. Rome never psychologically recovered from that moment. And it was not only the military humiliation. The economy was in total collapse. The Roman currency, the denarius, had been progressively debased over decades of desperate governments. In the time of Augustus, the coin was nearly 90% silver. In the time of Gallienus, son of Valerian himself, it had fallen to less than 2% silver. It was essentially bronze, with a thin silver coating on top. Inflation was devastating. The price of wheat at the time Diocletian came to power was 67 times higher than it had been under the Principate. And on top of all this, the plague. The plague of Cyprian, which ravaged the empire between 249 and 270 AD, killed up to 5,000 people per day in Rome alone at its peak. Alexandria lost more than 60% of its population. Rural provinces were decimated. And while pagans fled the cities to escape the sick, the Christians stayed, caring for the dying, burying the dead, including those of other faiths. Bishop Cyprian of Carthage exhorted them. This plague is useful as a training for us. That posture, which to many pagans seemed incomprehensible, was one of the factors that most accelerated the growth of Christianity decades that followed. Rome was bleeding from every artery, and no emperor could hold the ship together. It was in this context of absolute disintegration that a man emerged from the most obscure depths of the empire. His original name was Diocles. He was born around 242 AD in the province of Dalmatia, modern-day Croatia. And when we say he came from obscurity, it is not a figure of speech. The historian Eutropius records that most ancient writers claimed he was the son of a scribe. Others said he was the son of a freedman, that is, of a slave who had earned his freedom. His mother's name? History did not record it. There is not a single coin, a single inscription, a single mention of the name of the woman who gave birth to the man who would govern 60 million people. Think about that for a moment. The man who would become the architect of the greatest administrative restructuring in Roman history, a man who would be treated as a demigod, who introduced the protocol of prostration at the imperial court, who demanded that his subjects kneel and kiss the hem of his robe. This man began life without a surname, without a notable family, without an inheritance. What he had was military talent. and ambition. Diocles rose through the ranks of the Roman army with a discipline and an ability that drew attention. He served under the emperors Aurelian and Probus. He became commander of the Praetores Domestici, the emperor's elite personal guard. He was a man trusted by the system, an insider. In November 284 AD, everything changed within a matter of hours. The Emperor Numerian was found dead inside his litter during the retreat from Persia. The smell, the sources say, alerted the soldiers before any official could conceal the body. The army hastily convened, as was customary in those decades of chaos, to acclaim a new emperor, and the soldiers chose
Stupid!
What happened next was theatrical at the level of political genius. Diocles mounted a platform before the army. He raised his sword to the sun. He publicly swore that he had not killed Numerian. And then, in a gesture calculated for eternity, he pointed to the Praetorian prefect, Arrius Aper, Numerian's father-in-law, the man with the most to lose from the change of power, and personally assassinated him in front of everyone.
Stupid!
A single message. This man does not hesitate. And there was one more detail the soldiers whispered among themselves.
Dumbass.
A prophecy from a Gallic druid, years before, had told Diocles he would become emperor on the day he killed a boar. Aper in Latin means boar. It may be coincidence. It may be that Diocles knew exactly what he was doing when he chose that specific victim. Either way, the effect was devastating. The new emperor Latinized his name, from Diocles to Diocletianus, and launched what would be a 21-year reign. But there was still a rival, Carinus, brother of Numerian and co-emperor of the West. The civil war was swift. At the Battle of the Margus in 285, Carinus was defeated and, according to the sources, assassinated by his own officers before the battle was over. Rome, for the first time in decades, had a single emperor, in fact. And that emperor had enormous plans. What Diocletian saw around him was an empire that had survived the 3rd century through sheer institutional inertia, not through real strength. The Rhine and Danube frontiers were bleeding under constant pressure from Germanic tribes. The eastern frontier with Sassanid Persia was an open wound. The provinces were governed inconsistently. The army was loyal to its wages, not to the emperor. And taxes, collected in a chaotic, irregular, and brutally unfair manner, were not reaching the central treasury in sufficient amounts to sustain anything. A less intelligent man would have tried to solve one problem at a time. Diocletian solved them all at once. And it was precisely that total ambition, that will to reform absolutely everything, to control absolutely everything, to impose order on chaos by sheer force of will, that placed him eventually on the path of an inevitable collision. Because there was a community in the empire that could not be ordered, that did not obey the calendar of imperial sacrifices, that denied the divinity of Rome's gods, that grew in silence in the cellars of cities, in the houses of the rich and poor, in the barracks of the imperial army itself.
I'm fucking you up. I'm fucking you up. I'm fucking you up. I'm fucking you up.
The Christians. And Diocletian was about to discover they were a problem no edict could resolve.
You see my dick hanging out of
Diocletian was not a man of half measures. When he looked at Rome and saw an empire on the brink of collapse, he did not see a political problem. He saw a problem of architecture. The structure was wrong, the system was wrong, and wrong systems are fixed with engineering, not with hope. The first great decision of his reign revealed everything about how he thought. In 285 AD, less than a year after becoming emperor, Diocletian did something none of his predecessors had managed with lasting success. He voluntarily chose a co-ruler, not a rival, not a forced successor, a partner. His name was Maximian, an old comrade in arms, the son of peasants from Pannonia, brutally effective on the battlefield and, crucially, without enough personal political ambition to threaten Diocletian's power. The division was clear from the outset. Diocletian took the east, with his capital at Nicomedia in modern Turkey. Maximian took the west, based in Mediolanum, modern Milan.
Come on, you whore.
Neither resided in Rome.
Come on, you
The symbolic centre of the empire had lost its practical function. Power was where the army was, and the army was on the frontiers.
Come on, you fucking.
But the boldest move came in 293 AD. Diocletian had not merely divided the empire in two, now he would divide it in four. Thus was born the Tetrarchy, the rule of four. 2 Augusti, the senior rulers, and 2 Caesares, the junior rulers destined to succeed them.
Come on, whore.
Diocletian chose Galerius as his Caesar of the East. Maximian chose Constantius Chlorus as his Caesar of the West. The bonds were sealed with dynastic marriages.
Whore.
Galerius married Valeria, Diocletian's daughter. Constantius married Theodora, Maximian's daughter.
Move you, whore.
And here is a detail that most documentaries completely ignore. The Tetrarchy was not merely an administrative solution, it was a theological declaration. Diocletian assumed the title of Iovius, derived from Jupiter, king of the gods. Maximian assumed the title of Herculius, derived from Hercules, son of Jupiter. The structure deliberately mirrored the celestial hierarchy. Just as Jupiter rules Olympus and Hercules carries out his will in the world, Diocletian ruled and Maximian acted. The empire was not merely a political entity, it was a manifestation of the divine order of Rome's gods on earth. Think about what this means for the Christians. In a system where the emperor himself identified as the earthly incarnation of Jupiter, where every act of governance was simultaneously a religious act, where loyalty to the state and loyalty to the gods were one and the same. In that system, a Christian who refused to sacrifice to the gods was not merely a religious dissenter, he was an enemy of the cosmic order. But Diocletian did not arrive at that conclusion immediately. On the contrary, in the first 18 years of his reign, Christians lived in a period historians call the Little Peace of the Church, begun in 260 AD with the Edict of Gallienus, which had revoked previous persecutions. Churches grew in size and visibility. Bishops became publicly recognized figures. Christians held posts in the imperial administration. There were Christians in Diocletian's own palace, including, according to Lactantius, his wife Prisca and his daughter Valeria. Yes, read that again. The man who had launched the greatest persecution in Christian history very possibly had Christians living inside his own household.
You suck my dick.
Lactantius, who lived in Nicomedia during Diocletian's reign and was an eyewitness to the events, records that Diocletian forced his daughter Valeria and his wife Prisca to defile themselves by sacrificing. The use of the word forced is devastating. We are not talking about casual domestic paganism. We are talking about women who resisted and had to be coerced. Women who, in Eastern Christian tradition, are venerated to this day, Prisca as Saint Alexandra. So what changed? The answer involves politics, philosophy, superstition, and a man named Galerius. The first public sign of tension came in 299 AD at a ceremony of divination in Antioch. Diocletian had ordered a public sacrifice. The haruspices, the soothsayers who read the entrails of sacrificed animals, were to consult the gods about the future of the military campaign. But the soothsayers failed, repeatedly. They could not read the signs. Finally, the master diviner declared that profane men were present who were disrupting the sacred rites, preventing the gods from speaking. These profane men were the Christians making the sign of the cross during the ceremony. For Diocletian, who took religious rites with a seriousness bordering on obsession, this was a direct blow. He reacted immediately. He ordered all members of the court and all soldiers to perform public sacrifices or be expelled. It was a loyalty test. Many Christians refused. Many were dismissed or reassigned. But there was still no bloodshed. The definitive escalation came in the winter of 302 to 303 AD, when Diocletian and Galerius consulted the oracle of Apollo at Didyma, one of the oldest and most respected oracles of the ancient world. The response was disturbing. Apollo said that the just on earth were preventing him from prophesying clearly. Members of the court were quick to interpret this. These just ones could only be the Christians. Galerius is one of the most fascinating and least understood figures in this story. The son of a cattle herder from the Balkans, his rise to power was as improbable as Diocletian's. But whereas Diocletian was calculating, cold, strategic, Galerius was visceral. His opposition to Christianity was not merely political, it was personal. Lactantius describes Galerius's mother, Romula, as a fanatical pagan priestess who performed daily sacrifices and invited her neighbours to religious feasts. And when Christians refused to attend, she hated them and stirred her son against them. Galerius spent years pressing Diocletian to act against the Christians. The old emperor resisted, not out of sympathy for the Christian faith, but out of pragmatism. A large-scale persecution would generate instability, and Diocletian hated instability above all else. The deadlock lasted months. There were debates at court, consultations with jurists and philosophers. Porphyry of Tyre himself, the greatest pagan philosopher of his time, author of a 15-volume work called Against the Christians, circulated in the intellectual spheres close to the court, providing the philosophical justification for action. For Porphyry, the problem with the Christians was not merely religious, it was intellectual. They rejected Greek reason, they rejected Roman tradition, and they used texts such as the Book of Daniel, which, he argued, were literary forgeries written long after the events they claimed to predict. The persecution was born not merely from hatred, it was born from an ideology. But before we speak of what Diocletian did to the Christians, we must speak of what he did to another religious community, a detail that almost no channel mentions. On March 31st, 302 AD, Diocletian issued an edict against the Manichaeans. Manichaeism was a religion born in Persia, founded by the prophet Mani in the 3rd century, which mixed elements of Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, and Christianity into a radical dualistic cosmology. Good against evil, light against darkness, spirit against matter. It had penetrated deeply into the Roman Empire, especially in the Egypt. Diocletian's edict was brutal. It described the Manichaeans as monstrous and unheard of creatures from the race of the Persians, a nation still hostile to us. It ordered that leaders be burned alive together with their sacred scriptures. Common followers were to be executed or condemned to the mines. Members of the nobility who converted would forfeit all their property. It was the first time in the history of Roman legislation that the destruction of sacred scriptures was explicitly ordered by law, and it was a dress rehearsal. The same logic, the same vocabulary, the same legal framework that Diocletian used against the Manichaeans in 302 would be used against the Christians in 303. The Christian persecution was not born from nothing. It was tested first, on a smaller scale, against another religious community considered foreign and subversive. Meanwhile, Diocletian continued to transform the empire into something Rome had never been. His administrative reforms were unprecedented in their depth. The number of Roman provinces leaped from approximately 50 to more than 100, each smaller and more manageable. These provinces were grouped into 12 dioceses. Yes, the word diocese we use today for the territorial divisions of the Catholic Church comes directly from Diocletian's administrative reorganization. Each diocese was overseen by a vicarius, a direct representative of imperial power. And in an innovation that anticipated centuries of subsequent political theory, Diocletian separated civil from military power in each province. The civil governor did not command troops. The military commander did not govern civilians. It was a separation of powers that dramatically reduced the risk of regional rebellions. The army was reorganized and expanded. New taxes were created, and in 301 AD, the infamous Edict on Maximum Prices set price ceilings on more than 1,400 goods and services, with the death penalty for anyone who charged above the established limit. That edict failed spectacularly. Merchants simply stopped selling, markets emptied, informal commerce flourished in the shadows. Within less than 2 years, the edict had been quietly abandoned, but not before creating artificial scarcity and widespread discontent. It was the clearest sign that Diocletian, for all his genius, had a blind spot. He believed that the force of law could substitute for the force of reality. And that same belief, that an imperial decree could reorder human nature, was about to be tested in a far more dangerous arena.
God,
We arrive at the windows of 302 to 303.
God,
Diocletian and Galerius were in Nicomedia.
God.
The debates about the Christians had reached a point of decision. Galerius was pressing with growing intensity, and Diocletian,
That
the
man,
man who had resisted for years, began to yield. But he imposed a condition.
suck my.
He summoned his leading jurists and advisors. He submitted the question to formal debate, and he consulted,
Did you suck?
one last time, the soothsayers. The response he had received from the oracle of Apollo at Didyma had stayed with him. The just on earth were preventing the gods from speaking. Christians were corrupting the Pax Fiorum, the peace with the gods that sustained the empire. Then acting against them was not cruelty, it was imperial duty.
Dumbass.
Diocletian made his decision,
God damn
but
it.
he demanded one thing from Galerius: no bloodshed. Galerius wanted to burn alive all who refused to sacrifice. Diocletian refused,
Motherfucker.
not out of mercy, but out of calculation.
Come on,
Martyrs created problems. Martyrs became symbols. Martyrs fed the faith he wanted to extinguish. It was already too late for that reasoning to save anyone. The date was chosen with ritual precision. February 23rd, 303 AD.
You
The festival of
motherfucker.
Terminalia, dedicated to Terminus,
Move,
the
you
god of boundaries and borders. The symbolism was intentional.
Move, dick.
That day would mark the final limit of Christianity in the Roman Empire. So Diocletian believed. And in the early hours of that day, the soldiers marched toward the great church.
I didn't say bishop, I said bishop.
What happened in the early hours of February 23rd, 303 AD was not an act of spontaneous violence. It was an operation. Praetorian soldiers positioned, orders transmitted in silence. The great Christian church of Nicomedia, built on a high point of the city, visible from the imperial palace itself, large enough to hold hundreds of worshippers, flourished before the first rays of sunlight touched the walls. Diocletian and Galerius watched personally. From a window of the palace, according to Lactantius, two men in silence, watching what they themselves had ordered.
Dumbass.
The doors were broken down. The soldiers entered. They swept the interior in search of gold, silver, anything of value.
Fucking you.
They found the books, the sacred manuscripts, the Gospels, the Epistles,
Move!
texts that community had copied by hand, preserved, protected for decades. They were carried out to the street and cast into the flames. Then the two emperors debated how to demolish the building. Galerius wanted to set it on fire. Diocletian refused. The fire might spread to the neighbouring quarters. So it was military engineers, with tools and battering rams, who began the demolition stone by stone.
Bitch.
Within a matter of hours, the largest Christian temple in the Roman Empire was a heap of smouldering rubble. And the following day, the first edict was publicly posted. The text was surgical in its brutality. All Christian churches were to be demolished. All scriptures surrendered to the authorities and burned. Christian worship assemblies were prohibited.
You are
Christians
retard,
holding
you
public office
retard!
would be immediately dismissed. Imperial freedmen who were Christians would revert to the status of slaves. And Diocletian held to his condition: no explicit death penalty in the first edict. It lasted less than a day. A Christian, whom the sources do not identify by name, only describing him as a man of notable position, climbed up to where the edict had been posted, tore it from the wall, and ripped it in public.
You dumbass.
He cried out that it was an unjust order from unjust emperors. He was arrested on the spot, tortured, burned alive. Diocletian had said, "No bloodshed."
Suck
The
my...
blood had come on the very first day.
You suck my mother...
Then, in a sequence of events that Lactantius describes with the precision of an eyewitness, because he was one,
Dick.
two fires struck the imperial palace of Nicomedia in less than 16 days. The first occurred approximately 15 days after the edict. The second, less than 16 days after the first. The fire did not destroy the palace, but it destroyed Diocletian's narrative, because the accusation was immediate. The Christians had attempted to assassinate the emperors. Arsonists infiltrated into the heart of Roman power. Court fell into total paranoia. The imperial chamber's eunuchs were tortured to extract confessions. One of them, Peter the Chamberlain, Diocletian's personal attendant, was stripped, flogged with such violence that the flesh separated from the bones, then bathed in salt and vinegar to intensify the agony, and finally slowly roasted over coals. Died without confessing anything, because there was nothing to confess. Lactantius is direct. It was Galerius who secretly ordered the palace to be set on fire, so that the Christians would be blamed. Eusebius of Caesarea, more cautious, writes only that a conflagration broke out in the palace, I know not how, and was falsely attributed to our people. We will never know the truth with absolute certainty, but the result was real. Diocletian, who had resisted Galerius' pressure for years, who had insisted on no bloodshed, exploded in fury. His calculated restraint evaporated, and what followed changed everything. The second edict. Immediate imprisonment of all Christian clergy, bishops, priests, deacons, readers, exorcists. The empire's prisons filled with the speed the Roman penal system was not prepared to absorb. There are records of jails so overcrowded with Christian clerics that common criminals had to be released to make room. The third edict. Imprisoned clergy would be released if they sacrificed to the gods. The objective was transparent. It was not mercy. It was the public production of apostasy. A bishop who sacrificed was more valuable than a dead bishop, because a dead bishop became a martyr. A bishop who sacrificed broke the heart of his community. Many resisted, some yielded, and those who yielded, the traditores, those who handed over, left a wound in the church that would not heal for decades. The fourth edict. Universal compulsory sacrifice for everyone, men, women, children, across the empire, those who refused death. What followed was 10 years of terror that varied dramatically by region. In the West, under Constantius Chlorus, only the first edict was applied. Some churches were demolished, no documented executions. Constantius, father of the future Constantine, applied the law in form, but not in spirit. In the East it was different. Eusebius of Caesarea, who was there, witnessed what he described with a precision that still shakes those who read it. On many days, from 10 to 100 people were condemned to death, or had their eyes gouged out, or their limbs mutilated. In Phrygia, an entirely Christian village was surrounded by the army. The inhabitants refused to renounce the faith. The army set the village on fire, with everyone inside, men, women, the elderly, children. In Egypt, the executions became so routine that the authorities developed systems to accelerate them. Christians were killed in groups, sometimes dozens per day, so as not to delay the administrative calendar. Think about that. The Roman bureaucracy, the same one that managed taxes, land records and trade routes, was adapted to process religious executions with efficiency. And here are the concrete faces behind the numbers. St. George, a soldier of the Praetorian Guard, born in Cappadocia, martyred on April 23, 303. 1 month after the first edict. He refused to sacrifice. He was tortured for 7 days with an ingenuity of cruelty that hagiographies describe in disturbing detail. Beheaded in Lydda, in Palestine. Today, he is the patron saint of England, Portugal, Georgia, Lebanon, and the Scouts. His feast is celebrated in 49 countries. St. Agnes. She was 12 years old, born into a noble family in Rome, promised in marriage to the son of a magistrate. She refused because, according to her, she had consecrated her virginity to Christ. The rejected suitor denounced her to the authorities. She was taken to the temple of Vesta and ordered to sacrifice. She refused. She was beheaded. And today, every January 21st, 2 lambs are blessed at the Basilica of Sant'Agnese in Rome. The wool from those lambs is woven into the pallium, the symbol of the authority of Catholic archbishops throughout the world. St. Lucy, Syracuse, Sicily, 304 AD. Denounced by the very suitor she had rejected. She was killed with a sword to the throat. Today, every night of December 13th, Swedish, Norwegian and Finnish children wear crowns of lit candles and sing in her name. One of the most improbable and most beautiful fusions of Christian martyrdom and Nordic tradition. Let us pause here.
Who's Taylor who?
Because there is a moment in this story that deserves to be contemplated with stillness. While the edicts were being executed, while the churches burned, while the martyrs died, Diocletian was becoming ill. In the autumn of 303, during the celebrations of his 20th anniversary in power, the emperor began to show symptoms that the sources describe vaguely but consistently: growing weakness, inability to concentrate, episodes of mental confusion. Lactantius simply says he fell ill. The man who had ordered the greatest religious persecution in Roman history was crumbling from within, while the world he had built crumbled from without. In November 304, Diocletian disappeared from public life for months at a stretch. The rumours that he had died were so strong that commemorative coins were actually minted for his successor. When he reappeared in March 305, those who saw him were shocked. The man who had faced armies, reorganised an empire, and looked death in the eye without flinching, had aged decades in months. He trembled. He walked with difficulty.
Okay.
And on May 1st, 305, in a ceremony held...
So what's going on?
Hey, so you come pretty highly recommended by Jet. He's a fan of you, and I looked into some of your videos, and I think you're really funny. We were wondering if you would want to come and freeload for us, and basically what freeloading is you would just kind of come in. You're not eligible for the grand prize, but you would just kind of be a drain on resources. It's basically like a free stay. You just hang out and like try to get YouTube followers and.
But basically, it's self promo.
Yeah.
Okay. Heck yes, I want to.
But you could try to get donations for. I know you really want the hair surgery, or whatever. You could try to get people to, you can try to get some fans that could help you with that.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So you're in North Carolina?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Do you have any obligations for the next week? Would there be any scheduling issues?
I just got a party tomorrow. That's all. But other than that, no.
A party?
Yeah. We have a meeting. We have a meeting every Monday. But we're going out to eat for. It's not a party. It's a get together.
I see. I gotcha. Okay. Is there any way that you would be willing to skip that and just come out today? Because we throw better parties, I promise you. Yeah, we give you a really awesome party. We'll give you a whole party.
I need a few days to get everything scheduled with my mom and dad, because they're gonna have to drive me out to the airport in Greenville. Can I have you talk to them?
Yeah, sure. If you want to talk to your parents about it, that's fine. So what day? What's the day that you could fly out?
Let me go. Give me a second. Hold on. Hey, Mom. Hold on. Give me a second. They're in the bathroom. I have to wait for them to get out. But sometime this week, I'm sure. I know that. We just had to get everything scheduled.
Maybe not tomorrow, but the next day?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we want to do, if this is something you'd be interested in, we'd like to keep you to the end. Would you be able to stay until like the 14th of this month?
Let's see if I have to.
For 1 week? You do a week.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. Okay, but if you're interested, let's set that up. We can get you in touch with our guy who books our flights and he does all of our contracts and stuff. His name is Bill. I can forward your information to him and he can reach out and get you all booked up.
Okay.
Would you be willing to like book today and then just figure out your scheduling over like the next 2 hours or so?
Yeah. As soon as they get out of the bathroom, I'll get them on the phone.
Okay. All right, Chris, that sounds good to us. You're gonna get a call shortly from a guy named Bill, and he's the one that'll talk to your folks.
Okay.
And schedule the timing. Okay.
Okay, we had to tell them what it is. Hold on. Let me
Yeah,
get.
sure, mate. All we gotta do is look up fish tank. That's how you can find it.
Hey, Mom. Jesus fucking Christ. Jesus fucking Christ. Get this is a goddamn holy fucking game, God. Fuck it. Suck my motherfucking dick. Goddamn motherfucker. Come on, you goddamn motherfucker. Oh fucking Christ. Oh fucking Christ. Oh fucking Christ. Fucking Christ.